Hi everybody, I want to talk to you about chapter 5. So this is the online textbook, and we're going to talk about a word called stoichiometry and the mole in this chapter. Stoichiometry is the math, is a math intense chapter, if I could speak. And it's going to be counting numbers of atoms, numbers of moles, numbers of molecules or ions, and deciding how much is made in a chemical reaction. So it's important, especially if you're going to go into industrial chemistry, you need to figure out if a process will make a lot of a chemical for you and make you a lot of money. So stoichiometry is an intense math chapter, and you'll be using your calculator a lot, and you'll have to know how to use your exponent key, your EE key, usually it's called, or the up caret key. You'll need to know how to use that on your calculator to do this kind of math, because we're going to be using it for counting and figuring out a unit called the mole. Mole is a unit, it's kind of like a dozen. When we measure eggs, we use dozens. Well, in chemistry, when we measure atoms, molecules, or ions, we use a unit called the mole. So let's look and see what you're going to do in chapter 5. And you're going to be looking at, the opening essay, and they're going to explain stoichiometry to you, and we're going to need to know how to balance equations from that last chapter to be able to use that in our stoichiometry. So first step, you're going to remember how to balance. We have to use that so that everything turns out correctly. So if you don't have a balance, that's the first step always. If you don't have a balanced equation, you're not going to be able to do the math correctly. So remember how to balance, and they have some examples here, and they're going to watch out to balance things. The next thing they're going to talk about is the mole. The moles, like I said, is a counting unit. It's like a dozen. So we're going to show you the mole, and this number is something that we have to use all the time. So this is something to memorize so that we can use that in the future. It's called Avogadro's number. So look for that and read through that. And they explain where the concept came from and what they used to start off with. They used 12 grams of carbon as their base molecule that they decided to use. And then when they have 1 mole of something, it weighs a number of grams. So that's called a molar mass. This is very important. We talked about atomic masses earlier, and now we're going to talk about how much 1 whole mole of that would weigh. A lot of atoms, or a lot of ions, or a lot of molecules. How much that whole amount weighs in something, the unit called a mole. That's called molar mass. Please focus on this, because some people have trouble relating that word to what it really means. So this is something to really focus on. And they're going to explain how to do molar masses. So make sure you understand this. And there's more practice problems. So the more practice you do, the easier it's going to be for you. So I'd recommend as much practice as you need. So now we're going to use the balanced equation and the concept of a mole in this section to figure out how much you can make of a particular molecule that you're interested in. So read through how they do this. And that's something called the mole-to-mole calculation. These are the easiest type of stoichiometry problems. So get started on this first before we move on to the harder stuff. The next harder level is something called, is the mole-to-mass calculation or the mass-to-mass calculation. So these are, this is the next level of complexity, and then this is the hardest one, I would think, is mass-to-mass for most people. So take your time, do all the practice problems that you can so you get really proficient at it, because these are on the unit test. The next thing we're going to talk about, so do all these practice problems and check your answers, is yields. And this is this part here is important when we get to the lab, because generally in chemistry you are graded on how much you produce when you do a lab, and that's called the yield. So the more you can produce, close to what we think you should actually make in using the stoichiometry that we know. We can check how much we should get, and that's called a theoretical yield. And then we compare what you got in the lab, the actual yield, and what that percentage is. And sometimes you're graded on that, especially when you get to higher levels of chemistry. You're graded on the yields that you produce in the lab. So this is, I have questions on this on quizzes and tests, so this is another thing to focus on. And the last thing is, probably the hardest thing in this chapter is limiting reagents, and it's going to take you a while to get used to this. So this chapter you'll need a lot of time for, and you're gonna have to do it in little chunks because you can't understand this all in one go. So please take your time on this chapter. You're going to need to use that. So limiting reagents are, say you decide to make chocolate chip cookies in your house, and you only have a half a bag of chocolate chips, and you want to know how many cookies you can make. That's called the chocolate chip cookies. And say you had everything else you needed. You have tons of eggs and butter and sugar and flour and baking soda and all the stuff you need for chocolate chip cookie making, but you only have half a bag of chocolate chips, so you can't make as much as you want to. So that is, the chocolate chips are called the limiting reagent. So this is a very math heavy subject, and sometimes you do so much math you forget why in the heck you're doing it. So this one is going to take you a while to get used to. So please take your time. Understand the concept first. Here's they're talking about what it means, like the chocolate chip cookies I was talking about. And then we're going to have a lot of math that goes with it. So this is going to take you some time. So please take your time on this and check your answers. So I would do all these practice problems if I were you. So here's the end of chapter material. So here's your homework that we're going to be doing. It's going to take you a while, so don't put this off till the last minute before it's due for homework. Take your time and ask me questions, as many questions as you have, and we'll get you going on this. So good luck on chapter 5. This is going to be an undertaking, so take your time. Get friendly with your calculator. You're going to be using your calculator a lot. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.